In late 2025, the Kremlin believed it had finally cornered one of its most hated enemies. Denis Kapustin, a Russian national fighting on Ukraine's side, had become a symbol of armed resistance against Vladimir Putin from within Russia itself. To Moscow, he was more than a traitor. He was a personal enemy of the president, officially labeled a terrorist. So Russia did what it has done many times before. It put a price on his head, $500,000. For Russian intelligence services, the bounty was not just a reward. It was bait, designed to activate networks, mobilize sleeper agents, and trigger an assassination operation inside Ukraine. What Moscow did not realize was that the trap would snap shut on its own hand. Ukraine's military intelligence agency, the HUR, quickly understood the danger. According to later disclosures, Russian services were already preparing a real assassination attempt. Letting events unfold naturally would almost certainly mean Kapustin's death. Instead, Ukrainian intelligence chose deception, and it was convincing. At the end of December 2025, reports began circulating across Russian and pro-Russian channels. Denis Kapustin had been killed near the Zaporizhzhia front. The proof appeared airtight, a dramatic video showing an FPV drone striking a minibus supposedly carrying Kapustin. In reality, the footage was a carefully engineered illusion. Ukrainian intelligence used two drones. The first simulated the attack itself. At the exact moment of impact, the video cut, masking the absence of a real strike. The second drone filmed the aftermath, the same minibus, now burning, framed perfectly to suggest a lethal hit. To external observers, it looked like another successful drone assassination in a war already saturated with such images. Russian intelligence took the bait. Believing Kapustin was dead, Moscow released the promised funds through covert channels. $500,000 changed hands, and only then did Ukraine reveal the truth. On January 1st, 2026, HUR Chief Kirilo Budanov confirmed that Denis Kapustin was alive. The operation, he said, was a total success, a triple victory. First, Kapustin survived. By faking his death, Ukrainian intelligence neutralized an imminent assassination plot. Second, the operation flushed out Russian agents operating inside Ukraine. Those responsible for confirming the kill and facilitating payment exposed themselves and were identified, tracked, and dismantled. Third, the money itself became a weapon. Russian funds intended to eliminate an enemy were absorbed directly into Ukraine's war budget. The irony was complete. Denis Kapustin remains a deeply controversial figure. Often associated with far-right ideology, he leads the Russian Volunteer Corps, a group of Russian nationals and former prisoners of war conducting sabotage and cross-border raids against Russian territory, particularly in regions like Belgorod. His stated goal is the collapse of Putin's regime and the restoration of Ukraine's 1991 borders. This was not Ukraine's first deception of its kind. In 2018, Kiev famously staged the assassination of Russian journalist Arkady Babchenko to expose a Kremlin-backed murder plot. But this time, the illusion didn't just save a life. It forced Russia to pay for its own failure. To understand why the Kapustin operation worked so well, you have to understand the kind of war being fought behind the front lines. This is not just a conflict of artillery and drones. It is a war of intelligence services, deception, and psychological pressure, a domain where perception often matters more than reality. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine has treated Russian intelligence not as an invisible threat, but as a system that can be manipulated. Every bounty, every covert order, every assassination attempt creates a trail, and trails can be exploited. When Russia placed a bounty on Denis Kapustin, it followed a familiar pattern. Moscow relied on intermediaries, deniable operatives, and compartmentalized cells. No single agent knew the full picture, a structure designed to limit damage if something went wrong. But this same structure made Russian intelligence vulnerable to deception. Ukrainian counterintelligence had already spent years mapping these networks. Some agents were known, others were suspected. What they lacked was confirmation, proof of who was active, who was trusted, and who was operational. The fake assassination provided exactly that. By staging Kapustin's death, Ukraine created a moment of truth. Russian services had to verify the kill, confirm identities, transmit evidence, and release funds. Each step required human action, communication, movement, coordination. And every action left a signature. Signals intelligence lit up. Financial channels activated. Dead drops were accessed. Handlers contacted assets they had kept silent for months, sometimes years. From Ukraine's perspective, it was like switching on a light in a dark room. This is why Kirilo Budanov later described the operation as a dismantling, not just a deception. The objective was never only to save Kapustin. It was to force Russian intelligence to reveal itself under controlled conditions. There is also a psychological dimension. Russian services operate on reputation and fear. A successful assassination reinforces credibility. A failed one, especially one that turns into humiliation, does the opposite. By paying the bounty for a man who was not dead, Moscow didn't just lose money. It lost face. Inside intelligence circles, that matters deeply. Trust erodes. Officers become cautious. Initiative slows down. And in intelligence work, hesitation is fatal. For Ukraine, the message was equally important, both internally and externally. It signaled competence, confidence, and creativity. Ukraine was no longer merely defending itself. It was shaping the battlefield of information and intelligence. This approach fits a broader pattern. Since 2022, Ukraine has repeatedly used asymmetric methods to compensate for numerical and material disadvantages. Where Russia relies on mass and brute force, Ukraine relies on precision, adaptability, and misdirection. The Kapustin operation was not improvisation. It was doctrine, and it sent a warning. Any Russian attempt to conduct covert operations inside Ukraine would come at a cost, possibly even funding Ukraine's own war effort. In this intelligence war, bullets kill bodies, but deception kills networks.
Denis Kapustin is not an easy figure to categorize. To his supporters, he is a symbol of Russian resistance against Vladimir Putin, proof that not all Russians accept the Kremlin's war. To his critics, he represents a dangerous contradiction, a man linked to extremist ideology fighting under the banner of Ukraine's defense. Both interpretations are true. Kapustin, also known under the alias White Rex, has long been associated with far-right circles. Before the war, he was better known in nationalist subcultures than on any battlefield. This background makes him deeply controversial, particularly in Western media, where ideological affiliations often matter as much as military effectiveness. Yet war has a way of reshuffling priorities. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion, Ukraine faced a strategic dilemma. Russian citizens willing to take up arms against the Kremlin were rare. Those with combat experience, local knowledge, and motivation were even rarer. Kapustin and men like him filled that gap. The Russian Volunteer Corps, or RVC, is not a conventional military unit. It is a hybrid force, part political statement, part special operations asset. Composed of Russian nationals, defectors, and former prisoners of war, the group operates in the gray zones of the conflict. Sabotage, raids, psychological operations, these are its primary tools. Their incursions into regions like Belgorod were not designed to hold territory. They were designed to embarrass Moscow, force troop redeployments, and shatter the illusion of internal security. Every cross-border raid carried a symbolic message: the war could come home. From Ukraine's perspective, this made Kapustin valuable, but also dangerous. An asset like Kapustin attracts attention. Attention invites retaliation. The Russian bounty was not just punishment, it was a necessity. Allowing Kapustin to operate freely challenged the Kremlin's authority and undermined its narrative of total control. This is where the fake assassination takes on another meaning. By declaring Kapustin dead, Ukraine didn't just save him. It temporarily removed him from the chessboard. For Moscow, the problem was solved. For Ukraine, it bought time to reorganize, relocate, and reassess how such figures should be used. There is also a moral dimension that Ukraine cannot fully escape. Partnering with controversial actors carries reputational risks, especially when Western support depends on political legitimacy. Every operation involving the RVC must balance effectiveness against optics. The Kapustin deception helped manage that balance. A dead man generates fewer headlines than a living extremist fighter. Silence can be strategic. In modern warfare, utility often overrides purity. Ukraine did not choose its allies in a vacuum. It chose them under invasion, under pressure, and under existential threat. Denis Kapustin remains alive, but carefully managed. In this war, survival is not just about staying alive. It is about remaining useful without becoming toxic. The fake death of Denis Kapustin was not an isolated stunt. It was part of a broader Ukrainian doctrine that treats deception not as a trick, but as a weapon system. In traditional warfare, deception is often seen as a supporting act, camouflage, feints, false movements. In Ukraine's case, deception has become strategic. It shapes enemy decisions, redirects resources, and creates openings that weapons alone cannot achieve. The roots of this approach run deep. Ukraine inherited Soviet intelligence traditions, but re-engineered them for a very different war. Where Soviet doctrine emphasized secrecy and brute coercion, Ukraine adapted toward agility, creativity, and information dominance. The goal is not simply to hide the truth, but to control what the enemy believes. The Kapustin operation fits neatly into this framework. By staging a credible assassination, Ukraine manipulated multiple layers of Russian decision-making at once. Tactical units believed a threat had been neutralized. Intelligence officers closed files. Commanders redirected attention elsewhere. All of it based on a lie that was never meant to last forever, only long enough to extract value. This idea of temporary truth is central to modern deception. A falsehood does not need to be permanent. It only needs to be believed at the right moment.
Ukraine has used this logic repeatedly, from misleading troop movements to information blackouts before major offensives. Kiev has learned that uncertainty is paralyzing. Russian forces, already burdened by rigid command structures, struggle to adapt when reality shifts unexpectedly.
The psychological effect is cumulative. Each exposed deception makes the next one harder to dismiss. Russian commanders are forced into a dilemma: trust incoming intelligence and risk being fooled again, or distrust it and risk missing real threats. Both options carry costs.
The Kapustin case also highlights a deeper asymmetry. Russia relies heavily on intimidation and assassination as tools of control. Ukraine turned that habit against it. By faking a kill, Kiev didn't just stop an assassination. It demonstrated mastery over the very method Russia uses to project power.
History offers parallels. Intelligence agencies have long staged deaths, disappearances, and resurrections to protect assets or lure enemies. But rarely have such operations been acknowledged so openly afterward. Ukraine's decision to reveal the deception was itself a calculated move.
It reinforced credibility at home, boosted morale, and sent a message abroad. Ukraine was not just surviving. It was outthinking its adversary. There was risk, of course. Exposure educates the enemy. Russian services will adapt. They will demand more proof, harder verification, deeper compartmentalization. Deception always accelerates the arms race between truth and illusion. But Ukraine appears willing to accept that risk. Because in this war, time matters. Every month gained, every operation delayed, every resource misallocated by Russia contributes to Ukraine's strategic endurance. The fake death of Denis Kapustin did not change the course of the war on its own, but it revealed something essential. Ukraine is fighting on a battlefield where minds are as decisive as missiles, and where sometimes the most powerful weapon is a story that the enemy wants to believe.